All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to part two. As we go in part one was really kind of leading up to actually our sort of our miscarriage stories and a little background about that. But now we're going to go into a little more about actually the actual miscarriage itself and really kind of dive into some of our ideas on how we feel like women could better advocate for themselves with working with a health professional, and even that in hopes that health professionals could hear this and how we could better serve women who are miscarrying. So Haley, we both decided to have natural miscarriages, and my miscarriage actually went very smoothly, no complications, which is actually pretty rare from what I hear from other people. Yours, if you could share a little more, because from the get-go I was like, I want this at home, I don't want anybody around, this is very personal for me and my husband. I didn't want to be, but you were sort of like, wait, I don't like any of these options. So can you kind of explain a little bit about that?
Yeah. So after I came home and, we just found out that we lost the baby, I was like, okay, here's an idea about miscarriage that has been, I mean, this is going to sound really stupid, but before having a miscarriage, when someone says, well, we had a miscarriage, there's no pegs to hang that on in my brain. I'm just like, you were pregnant, and then you lost the baby, and then you weren't pregnant. But as far as like thinking, how does that happen? How do you go from being pregnant? Does it just like disappear?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like,
Mm-hmm.
there's, if without the frame of reference of having talked with friends who've gone through miscarriages and then going through one myself, it's just like, that's really sad. Like, I can like think, oh, I would be so sad to lose my children, and I can like connect on that level. But it's like, I have no idea, practically speaking, what a miscarriage involves, and certainly a lot of people aren't talking about it. It's like postpartum.
Yes.
You're going through your first postpartum after, like, a live delivery, and you're just like, why didn't anybody tell me
My vagina would look like this.
Yes, or that, or this,
Yes.
or this, or this.
Yes.
And they're like, oh yeah, about that. And I'm like, thanks for telling me, because I didn't know. And I felt the same way with miscarriage. So I'm like, okay, well, I don't know, what are we going to do now? So I called the midwife that we had. I actually had an appointment coming up for like a couple days from then, I think. And I had the ultrasound done before that first appointment. And so I called them just to say, well, I went in and I had the ultrasound, and we found out that we lost the baby. So what do we do now? And they were very sweet, and they were very kind. And they were like, yeah, we're really sorry about that. Here's what you can expect. You're gonna have some, period like cramping and a heavy flow, and you're gonna, pass the baby. And, if your bleeding gets like a little bit more than that, then you should go in and to the emergency room and have that like looked at. And I was just like, that's it?
Yeah, that's their instructions for birthing a baby.
I'm like, well, do you guys, so I guess in my mind, it's like you're pregnant and you're on this path to your birth plan. You find out that you've lost the baby, and so you deviate, and your birth plan like changes. But for me, it felt like I just got dropped off at the airport, and I'm like, really? I'm like, so what kind, and I remember asking over and over and over again, because I asked several different places, so what options do you guys have for like support for a natural miscarriage? And they were like, well, what do you mean? And I'm like, well, I've heard stories about my friends. I had several friends who tell me, stories about their own experience with miscarriage, and it was, in my opinion, very traumatic.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, they were like losing a lot of blood.
Mm-hmm.
They were alone. They were like passing out. There was like, I mean, and this was not just like an isolated, like one friend told me this. And then I do have other friends who had more gentle, natural, non-complicated miscarriages at home. So I don't want to sound like, miscarriage is always awful.
Yeah. Mine was actually, I was surprised at how smooth it went, in the sense that I didn't necessarily, because I'd went through natural labor. So when the baby came, a lot of my trauma was, because I was on the toilet, which a lot of people are, and I knew that. And somebody said you might want to get, kind of thing to catch the baby. And that just was too, like, I think at that point I just wasn't ready to accept that I was really going to do this. So I just was sort of like, that feels like too final. So I couldn't go there. But I really would recommend having that. It's kind of like a toilet strainer, because for me, like every pregnancy, when I go into labor, I eliminate everything that's in my colon. So that's what was going on. So, and I did feel this like blood come out, but I just thought it was a clot, because that's what they say. You're passing clots and you're passing that blood. So I flushed the toilet, and I was like, okay. So then I went to the tub, because I really like laboring in the tub, but like things kind of subsided. All of a sudden, a few minutes later, another, like, this big clot came out, and I was like, what is this? And I called Michael in, and I just said, I think we need to save this. And then a few minutes later, it hit me, that was the placenta. It's like, if that was the placenta, then the first plop was the baby. And then that's really what brought a lot of grief, was I just passed my baby and I flushed it down the toilet. And I wanted to see it and hold it and have that, final, a little more closure. But all that to be said, I didn't expect that first movement like that, because I was expecting more traumatic experience, because a lot of women talk about how difficult it is. And so again, I feel like, to kind of go back though, the overarching theme is there's not much education on what to expect, because they don't know, because everybody is different. But it is like, oh, you might want to take some ibuprofen and there will be passing, and just let us know if you start bleeding too much. And that's about it. And then women come to you and be like, I want you to be prepared for this. So then you're prepared for that, and so it's just, that adds to the grief, is just that I'm at home by myself.
And I have no idea what to expect.
Exactly. So you can so you are really advocating for, can I do this naturally, but under a health professional's watch?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what you're looking for. And it wasn't an option, right?
So the first place I had talked to, they were like, you're probably going to deliver before anybody would be able to be there, and it's going to be not complicated at all. And a lot of times these just go very smoothly, which is not false. Like, it's not false at all.
And these people are not evil. No. They're not, it's just that's what they know, and that's the system of it.
And she was actually very sweet, and she was like, I want to understand better, like, what kind of things that you're like, wanting. And I'm like, okay, well, one, the information that I feel like I'm getting about what to expect is conflicting. On the one end, it's like, if you soak this many pads in an hour, then that's too much, except during the active phase of the miscarriage, where that would be normal, which can last from up to 4 hours. And I'm like, so if I have that much for the first 4 hours, then it's okay? Or, I mean, just like myself, like, you think, any other delivery, you're not monitoring your blood loss. You're bleeding a lot. but you're not monitoring your vitals. You're not monitoring your blood loss and trying to make decisions. Do I need Pitocin right now?
Yeah.
Or should I go to the emergency room? Like, you have somebody there who's watching you, who knows what's going on, and they're the ones making those decisions, and you're just laying there with your baby.
Yep.
So I was like, and so what I was hearing was, okay, this is the normal amount in this window. After this window, it's not the normal amount. And then that would be hemorrhaging and you should go in. And so I just felt stressed that I'm like going to have to be going through, you know, a traumatic event, and not necessarily traumatic, a sad event, the loss of a child. And thinking about, is this too much? When was the last time we did that? Oh, we changed the ped at this time. We did it, you know, and those kind of things. And then I'm like, and what about, like, what if my blood pressure drops, or what if my, you know, heart rate's going up, or what if, you know, whatever. I'm like, I don't know how to check that stuff. And with friends who had experienced like blacking out from blood loss, then who also were, you know, wondering, it is a lot, but it's only been this long. You know, am I supposed to go in? Am I not supposed to go in? And trying to make those judgment calls. So what I was saying, what I was wanting was, can I have someone to be here with me who would monitor my vitals, who would monitor my blood loss, and in the event that I was hemorrhaging, would have anti-hemorrhaging medicine, and in the event that that didn't work, then would help me to transfer to the ER. I'm like, that's all I'm wanting. And to me, that sounded really reasonable. And I think to, I don't know, everybody else, it sounded like, what is this lady talking about? So I lost track of how many, but okay, this one midwife, she said, she goes, you know, we haven't really offered services like that, but I will look around and I will try to connect with somebody who can do that with their scope of work. And if we can't find anybody, I would be willing to do that for you, which I really appreciated. And so we looked around. I called a midwife that I had previously used, actually in the delivery of our first child, 9 years ago. And I told her the same thing. I was like, you know, we're back in town, and would you be willing to like assist? And she was like, well, what kind of, and she said the same thing. She's like, well, what kind of assistance do you think you need? And she's really asking. She was really asking. I did get some responses like that at a couple of doctor's office. Well, one doctor's office. And they were like, well, what kind of help do you think you need? And I was just like, I need help not to reach through this phone and slap you. That's what I need help. And she was like, well, you know, usually this is what's going to happen. This is going to happen. This is going to happen. She's like, but you know what, since you're a previous client of ours, I will give you our emergency line in the event of emergency, like you can call. But I was like, it's the same thing. Monitor yourself, make the judgment call if you've lost too much blood, and then make the appropriate action. But fast forward to, I've already lost too much blood. I didn't even know I had lost that much blood because I was laying down in bed and I felt perfectly fine till I looked down and it was all over the place. And I was like, oh, this is a mess. So I grabbed the chuck pad and I'm like, honey, can you help me walk to the bathroom? I get up out of the bed and it's like the lights are just going off. So I'm like, in what world can you, after hemorrhaging, drive yourself to the hospital? I don't see this happening. Or if my husband wasn't there, if nobody was with me, like I wouldn't have even been able to get to my phone to call 911. So I'm like, this doesn't make any sense to me.
And especially in light of that, you know, when the health professionals are giving that, you know, so say you're totally fine, like you were, like, you know, having the baby at home, even me. But they'd say, you know, you're probably bleeding, maybe take some ibuprofen, but nobody says make sure that somebody's there with you.
Nobody tells you to make sure somebody's there with you. Yeah. It was never, ever suggested even. Yeah. It was never suggested.
And I feel like, you know, any advice is like, but don't be alone. You know, and I feel like that it does need to be, because this does happen, you know,
Mhm.
and because we do see women, so we're not trying to freak you out. So just have somebody there.
Yep.
And guess what? As long as you're close, 911, you know, that will be there. But yeah, so I think that is a key point. And my husband was right close, you know, we sent the kids away when I knew that I was starting to. So,
Yeah.
but you did find a midwife to come.
We did.
Yeah.
So we found a local midwife, and well, first they connected me with some doulas. The doulas called around to a bunch of different places, and they were like, "It's out of our scope because we can't actually help you
Yeah.
medically,
Mm-hmm.
to do those kind of things." They talked with some other people. They talked with a doctor's office that said how many weeks gestation, because these are different factors that affect how the process is going to go. How far along gestationally the baby is, or babies, and then how long after and it's not just like this 12-week cutoff or this 20-week cutoff that it goes by. And it so she asked how far along the baby was, and they said 9 weeks one day. And she responded to them that it would be good for me to have somebody because I had a 20% chance of hemorrhage.
Wow.
And I was like, you are a doctor.
Yeah.
And you're telling them that I have a 20% chance of hemorrhage based on the gestational age of the baby.
Yeah, that's 1 in 5 women. That's a lot.
And it's like, but if you start hemorrhaging, call and go into the emergency room.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And I think what's unfortunate about that is like now it's like super traumatic. Now you're at the ER, you know, and it's so sterile and yeah.
So we found a midwife.
Yep.
And she's like, so what are you looking for? And I was like, all I'm looking for is someone to be there to monitor my vitals, monitor my blood loss, give anti-hemorrhaging medicine, if necessary. And that could be the end of it. Like, if you did hemorrhage and then they gave anti-hemorrhaging medicine, then you just skip the trip to the ER and you're good. And if not, then help transition to.
And to be able to tell me, because I had to look up online what a placenta was. And I think that's the other thing. Now that I think back on it, they said you'll pass the baby, but they never said anything about the placenta. If I was a first time mom, I would have no idea if I birthed the placenta fully, and so that's another, thing. So it's just like, even just like a picture book of like, when you're ready, this is what to look for. But I had to Google miscarried babies and placentas in the midst of it. So having that professional there, they can say, yep.
That was the other thing I talked to her about, because while I knew I wanted to, if it was possible, to, catch the baby, I also knew that waiting, that there was a chance that the baby would not come out whole. And I did have friends who experienced that, and I'm like, and so then there's another part of it that if you were, to get a DNC, they're doing all of that. They're saying we got everything. When you're naturally miscarrying at home or using side attack, then you're just there. And, if you're like, so Josie was actually attached to her placenta, like adhered on one side. So she was a partial molar pregnancy. And so there was no separating her on one side from the placenta, but it just kind of looked like she was laying on it like a.
And so that was actually a really cool thing, because one of our, and actually that hit Michael as well, which is a whole other topic of how it hits the men, and grief affects them. But I'd really wanted to see the baby, and you were actually able to send me a picture of yours. And I can still remember, getting that and, being very emotional about it, but in such a good way, in a healing way.
Yeah.
And so there is something to be said, but I can see how some women wouldn't want that, but it, that was beautiful to see. But yeah, but that is something to think about and know about. And again, going forward, now I know these things, right?
Mhm.
There's some things that so you ended up being able to pass naturally, and the midwife went home, right? Everything seemed
Yes.
good.
So, in the middle of the night, I started having contractions while I was laying down, and they were very strong. Like,
Hmm.
I wouldn't say they were, full term end stage contractions,
No.
but they were a lot stronger than period cramps, which is what they kept
Hmm.
saying was, oh, it's just going to be like menstrual cramps. And I was just like, if I was having cramps like this on my period, I would go to the hospital because this is not any sort of menstrual cramps I've ever had in my life.
Yeah.
And knowing like what contractions feel like, these are contractions. Your
Mhm.
uterus is much smaller. Your baby is much smaller, and so it's not like all the way over here, but it's definitely, at least
Mhm.
in my case, was more than.
It's kind of like a 5 out of 10. That was for me, where it was like that, like more kind of like the beginning stages of labor, and they picked up. But yeah, more like okay, I need to get the kids out of the house. Like
Yeah.
we're about to have a baby. Yeah.
Yes, and on that we plan to do the same thing. Like we had made like a birth plan like we would have with our other children, and we had plans set up for a couple different people that would be able to take the kids, and that we were going to have the baby at home. And I'm so thankful that we did, because between even just being in my bed and being in the bathroom, because it's not connected to the bedroom, I'm like, there was so much blood. There was
Mhm.
so much blood. Um, and I'm just thankful that we had that space and I had help with me.
Mhm.
So yeah, so our midwife, she agreed to those things. She goes, yeah, I
Mhm.
think we can do that. She goes, you will probably deliver the baby before I get there,
Mhm.
because it could go fairly quickly.
Mhm.
So I woke up in the morning, and it was about 6 o'clock in the morning when I got out of bed, and I had been having contractions in bed all for, I don't know, 3 hours or so, with no bleeding. And then when I got up in the morning, then it was like big stuff coming
Mhm.
out.
Mhm.
And I was like, whoa, like I wasn't expecting that. So I called the midwife and I was like, look, I had all these, I'm like, I just had a really big, clot come out. And from the time that it started, it was like huge clot, big gush, constant drip,
Mhm. Mhm.
big clot, huge gush, constant drip. So from 6 o'clock in the morning until like 9 o'clock at night, when I finally ended up having to have an emergency DNC, it was constant bleeding for like
Mhm.
15 hours.
Mhm.
So it was actually very quickly though. In the morning was I was standing at the counter and I was like, whoa, I just had another big clot. I texted the midwife. She's like, I'm on my way. And I was like, okay. So I didn't know that actually I had passed the baby. So I had a pad on, and I went into the bathroom, and I did have a miscarriage kit like ready to
Mhm.
go, which we can talk about another time. But part of that was a hat, what you were talking
Mhm.
about for the toilet. So it wasn't actually like a strainer, but it's like a
Mhm.
hat, and it covers up half of the toilet. So you can, go number two out the back,
Mhm.
and anything in the front stays in the front. And it also has like measurements so that you
Mhm.
can monitor blood loss
Mhm.
also. So I went into the bathroom and I pulled down my pants, and I could see the baby, and I was just like, it's so funny even now, like I get so excited about it. And I'm like, why am I so excited to see
Mhm. Mhm.
our baby? But I was like, Willie. I was like, it's the baby. He's like, really? All right. And I was like, she's right there. No, I am so thankful that I had the time from when I found out that we lost the baby
Mhm.
until we delivered, because there were so many preparations that I was
Yep.
able to make ahead of
Mhm.
time
And I
for
know
having
Willie
that.
like made a little
Yeah,
like
casket
yeah, a casket.
for our
Yeah.
baby. So
Mhm.
my husband was able to do that with our son, and um but another thing was I was just able to research a lot,
Mm-hmm.
and I found one site, one internet site, and I didn't find anything else on it, and no matter how much I searched about it, that talked about like putting the baby in a saline solution.
Oh, okay.
And so basically inside the uterus, the baby's in water.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you're looking at the ultrasound, I had seen on the ultrasound, okay, head, body, arms, legs. And I'm like, well, I want to be able to see the baby when the baby comes out. Now, the people kept telling me over and over again, well, don't expect to see anything that looks like a baby.
Mm-hmm.
And I would be like, well, what do you expect me to find?
Mm-hmm.
Like, they're like, it's just going to be clots and tissue. And I was just like, I felt like, I'm like, it's so insensitive, like to say that like over and over and over again. But I'm like, there was a baby on the ultrasound.
Mm-hmm.
So there should be a baby that's like coming out. But really early on, like the skeletal system is not fully developed on the baby. So as far as structure goes, there's not fat on, on the inside. So being in the water actually suspended the baby's skin is very buoyant, and it like takes shape in the water. When the baby's out of the water, they're completely flat. So when the baby came out, I could tell there was like a big clot, which is actually the placenta, and it was very large. In my case with the molar pregnancy. So when the baby was on the placenta and it was flat, but it was like a skin color, but I could see perfectly this little hand laying on top, and I could count 5 perfect fingers. And so I knew that was the baby, and I was just like, okay. So then we put the baby, on the chuck pad, and then I was like, we should work quickly because the skin is so delicate and it's so fragile, and it affects being in the moisture, or not no or I guess lack of moisture in the air, and drying out, and discoloration would happen really quickly. And I think it's a 0.9. I'll have to double check that for sure, but I think it's a 0.9 saline solution is like has that same equilibrium, I guess, as our skin. So too much salt and things would dry out from salt, and not enough, and then they could just absorb the water. But at that one, it just
it's like that, like the right osmolarity.
Yes. So you put the baby in, and the shape just came back, and it was like just like floating there. It didn't float to the top of the liquid, but the skin was just buoyant, and you could see the whole shape. You could see all the fingers, and the head and the body and the legs and the arms. And so, my husband and I were on the fence about it prior to it, because we're just like, once we saw her in the I think outside of the saline solution, I don't know that we would have introduced the kids to the baby. In the saline solution, then he looked at me and he was just like, do you think we should show her to the kids? And I was like, I think so. Like so we actually took a picture of her outside of the saline solution, inside of the saline solution. And then when we showed her to the kids, we first talked about her with the kids, and we said, she's on like a placenta. I don't know if we explained to them what the placenta was, so that they wouldn't be like, what's that, red thing at the bottom. But they over like 4 in a row from 9, 7, 4, and 2, they were like, she's so tiny, she's so little. And none of them were like, whoa. It was like, that's a baby. And they'd be like, that's the tiniest baby I've ever seen. And I'm like, I know, isn't that amazing? And so I'm so thankful to have those, and we love sharing those pictures with anybody who would want to see them. We never like publicly posted them anywhere, just because I know everybody's
triggering.
Everybody's at a different place with that, and I want to totally respect that. But if anybody and everybody wanted to see her, I would show her with anybody. And I think that it's okay if people don't.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Like I have like my closest friends, even some of them are like, no, I just think it's,
Yep.
I'm not there yet
Mm-hmm.
with my own loss. And I completely,
Mm-hmm.
I'm okay with that. So
So you got to see the baby, and that was
yes.
that's probably almost a high, right? And for us, that was almost the low, I would say. And that was one of Michael's, like, he just felt like, oh, is our baby gonna feel like we didn't want it? We just flushed it down the toilet, and that sort of thing. So just different.
I would say mine is far less common across the board. Like I would say of most of the like testimonies that I've heard of people's loss, it is along that same line. So it's not like, I mean,
yeah. But your kind of is more so afterwards then, because after that, kind of within a few days, like my energy was back, that night. I just, once I passed the baby, it was like I felt almost fine, it's still bleeding, but for you, then it's almost like that's when stuff's really started to pick up.
like I got to see her. I'm like, we did catch her, and I was like, and she's in one piece. And we had prayed and prayed and prayed and prayed, because I was just like, Lord, I know it's okay if she's not, but I'm like, if she would be, it would just be such a gift. So I'm so thankful for that. And so then the midwife got there, and I was still standing up in the bathroom. I mean, I'm like a bloody mess. There's like blood everywhere all over the floor. But I'm like oblivious, and I'm just standing there, and I was like, all of a sudden I was like, I should lay down. So they're like, yeah, you should go lay down. So I went to go lay down. And then as soon as I was laying down in bed and I was up, I had a fresh pad on. We had chuck pads all over the place. There were chuck pads on the floor beside the bed. There were chuck pads all over the bed. I had a pad on in the bed, and there were chuck pads in the bathroom, especially in front of the toilet.
Pads, kind of like absorbency pads and
yes,
cloths,
those like
disposable.
Yeah, they're. I mean, I think we got them, most of them at the dollar store, but they're like these really big. They're like those things you put down for a dog.
Yep.
Yes, those things. And I went and laid down. She brought her in, and at that point, I couldn't tell what was going on with Josie with like the placenta. And then so we just decided that we should keep her like together, because if we tried to separate her from the placenta, it was like, obviously she was like fused to it on like one of her sides. And so we put her into the saline solution, and that's when we saw her like, come all the way
up, kind of back.
Yeah. And then they're like, okay, we're gonna check your vitals. And my blood pressure was doing good. My bleeding was heavy. But it was still like, you have just delivered the baby. There still could be some left in, but thankfully, and she was able to go over and like look at the baby and say, yeah, the whole baby is there. And what it looks like is like the whole placenta is there too, because it was very big. What we didn't know at the time was that it was a partial molar pregnancy, and that there was more placenta. So I'm laying in bed, and I'm like, okay, this is great. And I'm like, I'm just so thankful that she's there. And I'm like, everything's fine. I'm like, and I don't even care. I was like, I was expecting that everything was going to go fine. And I was like, but I wanted her to be there just in case it wasn't. So she's like, okay, I'm going to come back in a couple hours, and I'm going to check you again after that. And monitor like how the blood loss is going. So we said, I think it was, I don't know, we set a time, and it was like, right now it's still heavy, but you're still in this window of the very beginning. And we're going to check back in at this time. And if it hasn't gone down by that time, then we'll reassess at that time. So I was like, okay, so I'm laying in bed, and I think it was before the 4-hour mark or something, but I was still bleeding really heavily, and we hadn't gotten to that checkpoint yet. And I'm not a huge person. So, I mean, for me, doing that many pads an hour might have been a lot more than for somebody else in like such a short period of time. But I remember I was changing the pad like every half hour,
Okay.
and it was a lot. It was like completely saturated every half hour, and they were like huge overnight pads. But I felt fine and I was in the bed. So then I was like resting and I wasn't really paying attention. I think I had gone like an hour between changing it from the last time. And when I looked down in the bed, it was like the pad was saturated, I was saturated, all the chuck bed was saturated, and I was like, oh, that was gross. So then I was just like, hey, Willie, can you help me? And I'm feeling like perfectly fine. So I sit up in the bed and I'm grabbing the chuck pad to get out of the bed. And he came and I was like, can you just help me like get to the bathroom so I can get cleaned up? And as soon as I stood up on the side of the bed, I was just like, oh, I think I stood up too fast. And so I just like knelt down on the ground and he's like, are you okay? And I was like, yeah, I just feel like I'm gonna throw up. And I was like, I think I just got out of the bed too fast. And he's like, well, here, let me help you get to the bathroom. But as soon as I stood up, it was just like my ears went quiet. And then I started feeling like super dizzy. I was like, Willie, I can't hear anymore. And then I was like, Willie, I can't. I was like, I think I'm going to throw up. I was like, Willie, I think I'm going to pass out. Willie. And then by the time we got to the bathroom, which is just like one door down the hallway from our bedroom, I was like, I think I'm going to throw up, but I can't get up. And so I laid down on the floor and he was like, I'm calling the midwife. And his description of what I looked like was that I was dying. He's like, your lips are white. Your skin is white. You have dark circles around your eyes. He's like, I'm calling the midwife. And so I was laying there on the floor. And then starting from my fingertips started going numb. And then my hands started going on both of them at the same time. And then I was like, Willie, I can't feel my fingers. I was like, Willie, I can't feel my hands. I was like, Willie, I can't feel my forearm. Willie, I can't feel my upper arm. And it came all the way up to my shoulders. And I was like, Willie, I can't. And I just, like in my mind, I was just laying on the floor and I was like, it's going to come all the way up to my head. I was like, it's coming to my head.
Willie, I can't. Yeah.
I know. And I was like,
so scary.
And this is another thing that was never discussed with me before, because they're just like, if you bleed too much, then go to the emergency room. And I'm like, if you're laying down and resting in your bed and you don't know that you're bleeding too much, you're gonna get out of the bed and you're gonna pass out on the floor. But then when I was moved into the bedroom, they were on the floor. They're like, put her knees up. So I was just like laying on the floor looking like a dead person, and we put my knees up. And as soon as they I was laying on my back, my knees were up. Then it was like this started coming back down, and then
it was the blood. Yeah.
Yes, it was like you need to raise, the blood pressure in the core. But I'm like, that would be like a really helpful piece of information in the event that you're like passing out on the floor. Lay down on your back and put your knees up, like that.
That should be like 101. Everybody should know that.
I don't know that. Yeah. And I'm like, oh, that feels so much better.
Yeah.
And so I'm laying there and Willie just called the midwife. And it was so helpful that we had somebody to call.
Yep. Because she knew the whole backdrop.
Yep. And he's like, we're in here. And she has, anti-hemorrhaging medicine and other things that she can use to help. And he's just like, this is what's happening. He's like, how close are you? Should we wait for you? Or should I bring her in right now? Or should I call an ambulance? And she's like, I'm right by you guys. I'm coming over. And she's like, I will get to you faster than an ambulance would get to you. So she came with the lady, the assistant. And then they came in and they gave me oxygen and they checked my blood pressure. My blood pressure was very low. And they gave me Pitocin, a shot of Pitocin, and misoprostol, which I think is Cytotec. And so I was laying there and they just waited with me and they're like, okay, your blood pressure is this. And they checked it, your pulse is this. And they're like, it's really bad. And so they waited after the Pitocin and the misoprostol, and then they checked again. They're like, okay, it's going up a little bit. We're going to check this. They changed the pad. And within maybe like half an hour or so of administering the stuff and then checking along the way and waiting, I started feeling a little better because with the
Mhm.
oxygen, and I was drinking, I don't know, I was drinking broth or
Mhm.
something, and I just started to feel better, and I
Mhm.
was like, oh my gosh, I feel so much better.
Mhm.
And they checked my bleeding. My bleeding had gone down like half. So
Mhm.
where I was going through a full giant pad like every 30
Mhm.
minutes, it had gone down to one an hour, which is still considered heavy.
Mhm.
So what they did was they left me with, so we made a plan. They're like, okay, we're going to check back at this time.
Mhm.
We want you to get in the bed. And if at this time it's not slowed down anymore, then we want you to take the second dose of
Mhm.
the misoprostol. And I was like, okay. And I felt totally fine with that.
Yep.
I was like,
We have a
we have a
plan.
plan.
Yep. Mhm.
We're assessing the situation as it
Yep.
goes. I have the medication here, and it's the same medication that they send people home with to induce um, the miscarriage. And so I was like, and that was another thing that was going through my mind, is like, if I wasn't with somebody and they would have sent me home with this to induce the miscarriage, why not send that home with people who are waiting and having a natural
Mhm.
miscarriage, because it's also an anti-hemorrhaging medicine.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I'm like, it's not like they're not sending it home with
Mhm.
people.
Yeah.
But why not send it home with people who are waiting,
Yep.
so that in the
Mhm.
event that happens, that they could take it? And that was another question that I had that I thought would be a good suggestion. And maybe they know, I mean, maybe I don't know something, why they don't do
Mhm.
that. So then, I don't know, it was probably an hour later or something. Something happened and I had to get out of the bed again. And then it just happened all
Yeah.
over again.
Mhm.
So at that point, we were like, I had already taken the other dose, I think, of the stuff.
Mhm.
And we were like, okay, we're going to go in.
Yeah.
Because we've exhausted the plan
Mhm.
that we've had. And now we want to see, what my blood count is.
Yep.
Now we
Mhm.
want to see what my electrolytes are, or if I need IV fluids and that
Mhm.
kind of stuff. So then we went in and we had our subsequent DNC, which at that point I was like, I don't even care.
Mhm.
I was like, the baby's at the house.
Mhm.
I want the bleeding to stop because I feel awful.
Mhm. Something might be wrong. We need to take care of this.
Yeah. And so I went in, and then that's when they found that there was a lot, I wouldn't say a lot, but there was more than they were expecting of the placental tissue that was left inside. And then I found out at a later appointment that when it came back from pathology, that it had abnormal cells that would have been indicative of a partial molar pregnancy, which would have been like a mass of growing cells I'm assuming in the placenta.
Yeah, kind of what's interesting about that is like, because my bleeding stopped because the placenta was fully birthed, and so I think that's like the thing is like, if you're still bleeding, it's because your body, it's not sending the signals. And yeah, and I had a sister who she basically started bleeding very heavily in the car, and then her husband had to come and pick her up, and then they transported to the hospital. And like, but she'd started bleeding earlier that morning, but she still went to work because she didn't know. And anyways, they're like, no, we passed the baby, so like we don't know what's going on. And then they're like, well, do you have any? And he's like, we saved the clots. And anyways, they like look through the clots and they're like, well, there's no baby in here. So it kind of goes back to like, but when you're calling them, they say, oh, it's just clots and clumps. So yeah, I definitely think there could be some like a class, education, here, watch this video, and done very well and very respectfully and very honoring. And even to the point of, you might still this
And
might not be you.
Right. It's
but,
not alarmism, like
mm-hmm.
everybody needs to
But it's
be
just
afraid.
education, and because there are birthing classes, for that. So kind of for brevity's sake, and kind of what are some things that because you really had some great ideas of like, between packages to, kind of what are some better things. So what are some of those ideas? And, and neither one of us are like, let's head this up, but, maybe this serves somebody else and they can, take it and run with it, or, maybe some day down the road, we come up with something. But what are some of those things of like that, the takeaways of what you and I wish we would have known?
Yeah. When I went in to talk with, because we had an OBGYN and a midwife.
Mm-hmm.
So the OB was, in the event that I need to come into the hospital for a DNC kind of thing, we were setting up that, and for follow-up appointments, then we were having the OB, and I just asked like if they had any sort of miscarriage kit, and she was like, well, what? I don't know what you mean. Like what would be in something like that. And so I was thinking back to when we were deciding between a home birth
Mm-hmm.
and a birth center birth. If you did the home birth, there was just practical things in there, like chuck pads that you had to have,
Mm-hmm.
to put around the house for those kind of things. And I was like, well, what would be helpful to have if you were wanting to have a natural miscarriage at home where you wanted to see the baby? Not everybody wants to see the baby.
Mm-hmm.
And so some of those items wouldn't be necessary in that sense. So
you could almost pick a kit,
mm-hmm.
of what you want, maybe a la carte, these are some things.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, well, I don't know, when you have a baby and you leave the hospital, they give you this great big bag and it's full of all kinds of stuff, some that you're going to use and some that you're not going to use, and some stuff that you throw away, and samples and literature and all this kind of stuff. I was like, I think there just be some things that would be helpful. And I told her, I was like, well, like a hat for the toilet, which I know they have because they use them all the time, to monitor blood loss and to help catch the baby. And I was like, a saline solution, something to put the baby in if you wanted to do, because some people do like to do testing, and we did end up having a genetic test, and that's how we found out that she was a girl. And chuck pads, maxi pads. When you leave the hospital, they give you those big pads,
ice packs.
Yeah, ice packs, whatever. And so I'm like, chuck pads for the bed or for, whatever. So
and even they give you ibuprofen when you leave, like that's like the prescription stuff that they do.
Yeah. And just something, or even if in that they said, okay, here's some Cytotec in the event that you have a hemorrhage like this, or what to do if you're bleeding too much, or, just some more literature or
but they do have like a book on like how to breastfeed. They had an amazing book on breastfeeding that I read like twice, when they sent me home. But yeah, like how cool would it be for them to be a book, and flip here if you want to learn about this, that sort of thing,
or what to expect to see. I had to go find on the internet, at different stages, like what would you expect to see? How do you know if everything came out? All those kinds of things. So even if there was just, something like that. And she's like, yeah, we don't really have that. But when I was leaving, I walked downstairs, I went down to the first floor, and I was like, it's okay. Cause I was planning on just building, my own kit myself, because I had the privilege of having that time. And I got a phone call when I was still in the lobby downstairs, and it was like, hey, are you still here? And I was like, yeah, I'm just down. She's like, well, we pulled together a few things for you, and we just wanted to give them to you. And I was like, really? Like, so I felt super loved by that. And I just knew, like, as emotional as, it can be, and how insensitive a lot of the medical field can be about it, like you said, where women who have experienced miscarriage are like prepping you, because they're like, well, this is what to expect, because it's going to be brutal in there, how it's treated. I just felt like it wasn't so much that they didn't care as much as they just didn't know that oh yeah, that would be helpful. Sure, yeah, we can do that. So I was really thankful about that. So I think for me, having the kit was really helpful. It helped me to feel like that I had something I could prepare, that when it was happening, that, you know, it wasn't just something that was happening to me, but something that I was like a part of. And I had the plan that, you know, we wanted to, if we could, catch the baby, and that we wanted to do the saline bath, and we were able to do those things. So I felt that aspect of it was really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think it depends on your personality. Like with everything, I'm actually, I shouldn't say everything, but some things I'm not a huge researcher on because I get lost in, in land. So I never knew about the saline solution, even though seeing the baby and that was important to me, I would have never known that, and that would have been another thing to learn the hard way, had we actually been able to see the baby, so that is very interesting. I do think there's a lot of room to grow, and I hope that, when our kids are having babies, they, if hopefully they don't, but if some of them go through this, they'll be like, yeah, this is what I got, and we can be like, that's so wonderful, like we didn't have that, and they'll be like, what? I think for me, some things that are important is like the memorial things. And like for me, we made a wind chime that we have outside the door with, we found a name that's in Greek that really represents that, like we just don't understand the ways of the wind, but we know that it's there, and with the birth date on it, and then kind of a neat thing that I'm doing is I'm writing a book for our son Benaiah, but two of the characters are Lucas and Eliezer, who, were kind of just represent that twin, that I don't know, did I try, and it doesn't matter, but there, but just kind of honoring the baby in that way. And like those are some things that really helped me. And I think that's where it's like this pregnancy wasn't in vain. It did not serve a purpose. Now they're going to be legends in this book, and and inspired by that, and it's really neat to incorporate and honor their life in that way. So I think like that's some of the stuff like that's important to me, but that's not important to everybody.
Yeah.
But is there anything else that you would like to kind of add to that, or?
I think as far as the information goes, we already hit on it before, but just to reiterate that it was never like suggested or you know, encouraged that there be somebody with me during the process. In no literature did I see that. In no conversations with the people did I see that. That just like personally, I just feel like that is probably, of all the things that could be different, like that's just the easiest thing that could be changed, that I think would have a better outcome for women's health. So I think that people should have somebody with them, but it's so difficult, and I understand because many women have found out that they're pregnant, and it's really common in our day that you don't tell anybody. And if the first trimester is when most miscarriages happen, and then you haven't told anybody, some people don't even tell their spouses or their partner, and you haven't told anybody, you find out that you've lost the baby, so then you again don't tell anybody, and the information that you're given is it's not going to be a big deal, you're going to have menstrual like cramps and heavy bleeding, then I think that it would be easy to be like, oh, I can just
do this at home.
Yeah. Or like you said, your sister was out going to the grocery store or whatever. Like I had friends who went to work. Or there was somebody else who went on a business trip, or there was somebody else who was like, well, my husband's at work, I'm not going to have him come home from work. She's like, I was just at home with my kids. And then I passed out. And I'm like,
oh, this could have been so prevented if we just had much better perspective on this first trimester experience in general. Yeah.
And then along those same lines, I think, I know that right now we're talking about miscarriage, but I think beyond that, like people who are in a circumstance where they believe that an abortion is the only option for them, I feel like more so would be inclined to do that alone. And I think that even if it's like, I don't know, just if you weren't going to have somebody with you to have a plan and to really just have somebody there with you, no matter what the circumstances are, because there is a lot of potential risk that could go in there. Not that I am, would say, condoning like abortion.
Our beliefs, we hope somebody doesn't choose that, but if that is a choice, there still needs to be education around it. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, I think just kind of one last thing. I know that that it's a Rise and Climb podcast, so thank you for sharing your story, because the whole hope is to share our stories of, the hardship and what we've gone through, healing, to offer people hope, in the midst of theirs. So, for me, especially specifically with the miscarriage, God gave me, some songs that just really spoke to my heart and ministered to me that way. And just when I was resting and in bed. And actually it was really cool because God gave me a vision of two babies in a dream of mine. So that was cool, because even though I didn't get to physically see, I do feel like that was imprinted on me. But if there's just a spiritual truth or a nugget that helped you kind of rise and climb through this, what is that, just to kind of leave with our audience?
Yeah, I was so comforted and still am. Like when I think about her, I know that she's alive. And I always tell our kids, like, she's alive more than we are. Like we're in the flesh. Like we battle with death. We're going to die. She's not going to die anymore. Like, her body will raise from the dead and be reunited with her. So the hope of the resurrection, it's been just, I mean, that's the hope that we have. And also, I think it's Psalm 139, where he says that he knit us together in our mother's womb, and that all the days that were ordained for us were all written in his book before one of them came to be. And in Josie's case, that was 9 weeks and 1 day. But just in his sovereignty and his, I don't know, I just have so much assurance and peace and hope and joy because of who God is, and that he's good and he knows all the days of our lives, yours, mine, all of our kids, including the ones that went early.
And that reminds me, in that book, Grieving the Child I Never Knew, there's this picture of, Jesus sitting in a rock chair, rocking our baby, and that just that's still, it's like, they could, they couldn't be in any better arms. And, it's so sweet too. And obviously emotional, but it's just so sweet to know that like, okay, Jesus, you got this covered, and then I think too, it's just like when you are having those hard moments, it's like Jesus is there to rock with you too, and that is okay. And just really making sure that you're creating space. And I think one thing that I would say, kind of fast forward through stuff, although physically everything went through fine, emotionally afterwards, you still went through pregnancy, you still have hormones, and you have grief. And I can remember, like, within a week, I was up north with my family, and like I had a freak out in the kitchen, and it was like over pizza, and I was like, "You got a pizza, Benny," and like everyone was like, and it was like, dude, you guys, like, just because I look fine, like, doesn't mean I'm fine. And just giving yourself grace and then others grace, because they'll forget too, because you'll even forget. And so does, like, and just saying that of like, you know what, I'm not okay yet all the time. Like sometimes I'm fine, but grief comes out really weird. And I had a really weird instance of grief, and I got a haircut. The only reason I got a haircut was because I was taking photos. The only reason I was taking photos because I wasn't pregnant. and they botched my haircut. And that was a really big deal. Like, I don't care that much about my hair, but it wasn't about the hair. And so I think that is that, like, that grief will or may, come differently for you, and that's okay. So, and just process it, and you bring it to the Lord, and he will heal that. But yeah.
The postpartum for Josie was the worst postpartum that I've had.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for any of our other ones. Well, one, I was anemic.
Mm-hmm.
So they were like, well, you're like on the borderline of needing a blood transfusion. But I was like, I don't want a blood transfusion. And just like not being able to like get out of bed. I was like, after you have your postpartum, it's like you really shouldn't get out of bed.
Mm-hmm.
You feel very sore. You're very tired. You have lost a lot of blood. Like, you're weak. But this was like, I can't breathe. Like, when I get up, my heart starts like racing. I have awful migraines. Like, it was just really, really difficult for a couple of weeks that I had to have people in the house. And so I'm in my bed and I'm bleeding still, and not much. So after the DNC, it had gone down significantly. But I'm like, I'm doing all the postpartum things. Somebody's out there taking care of my kids. Somebody's out there taking care of our house. And I'm supposed to be in here nursing a baby. And I'm just in here by myself. And that was like super, 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 super hard. And that was like the first like tangible loss of her as far as my experience went, because it wasn't like, we have our kids now and we lose one of them, we would feel that in tangible ways throughout our day, every day. But I'm like laying in bed like I would be postpartum, but there's no baby here. And that was super, super hard.
So I think that's just the reality, is that it hits us at different moments and times. And I think the best thing we can do if we know somebody going through it is reaching out and then letting them have space to respond back, and being there and asking them, there's this mix of asking what they need, but nobody will ever turn down a meal,
or doing the dishes,
laundry, taking the kids, even if it's a week after, just taking the kids for a night, because grief is still going to come up after that, and you're still going to be tired, and the hormones are still going to be there, and in communicating that with your spouse. And so because it just will come out in different ways at different times for everybody. All right, how about we say a prayer? And thank you guys for listening so much, and we'll end at that. But dear Lord, and just I feel like Abba Father is the perfect word for you right now, and that you are the Father of us here on earth and everybody in heaven with you. And I just lift up all the women and the families affected by miscarriage or loss, whether that has been through an abortion or a miscarriage or just an infant loss, and just a loss of a life too soon. And we just thank you that you're sovereign, and that you come to us no matter where we are in our healing, and you're there. And we just pray that this story can help others heal. And we pray that just for some more healing in this area, and just open the doors for there to be more support around women and families in this area, so that it can be more honoring to the life that you formed in our womb. So we lift this all up in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
All right.